Thank you for listening to Life Improvement Radio. You are listening to a rebroadcast of a previously recorded show.
I'm Julie Teeling with Life Improvement Radio. I am here with Bill Clegg with his book, Portrait of an Addict as a Young Man. And I want to just go ahead and start off with, why was it so important for you to get this out in this way about your experience with addiction?
Well, there's sort of two answers to that question, in the sense that in terms of writing it down and getting the story out on paper, that was a process that began as early as the period of time when I was in rehab. And so much of the last 2 months of my using, which was nonstop, 24 hours a day, was plagued with this kind of extreme paranoia. And so, when I finally sort of woke up after a suicide attempt, after coming in through the emergency room and ending up on a psych ward and then ending up in rehab, it was as if, the dust had settled and I had a lot of question marks. Because some of that stuff, some of the paranoia...
It's crack.
Yeah, totally. But it still felt real.
Right, of course.
The memories of it still felt real. And I knew then that there was no way that I could, sort of sift through the paranoia, with the reality. And so I ended up writing a lot of stuff down because I was very convinced that a lot of my access to that would evaporate, in the same way that when you wake up from a dream or a nightmare, those details just magically sort of vanish. And so I wrote a lot of that stuff down in rehab, and then it just came gushing out. And for the 6 weeks that I was in rehab, I wrote a lot. And then when I came back to the city, didn't, and got sober for a year. And then I went back and looked at what I had written, and it just triggered more memories, and I just started writing again. And it was literally, it sounds gross, but I sort of liken that process to having the flu, being nauseous and having to throw up. It's I didn't have a choice. It's it was coming out no matter what. And
vomit.
I could try and stop it, or I could just let it go. And so it came out. Then the second sort of answer is well, why did you choose to have it published? Sort of deep into that, there was a moment where the shape of the book kind of suggested itself, and I kept on writing, and I sort of struggled long and hard about having this stuff out in the world. It's not attractive.
You can't take it back either.
Yeah, and exactly. But in my experience, when I was getting sober, the more stories that I heard of people who I identified with, who would, describe doing things on drugs that I thought I was the only person who had done, I just thought, my addiction took me to a very extreme place, and I had a lot of shame around that. And so...
Which is common. And
because it's common, because so many people are crippled by shame and use over that shame a lot, I thought there may be some worth in the world to having my story out there in all its sort of gritty specificity. So if there's any specific that somebody identifies with along the way and sees themselves, they can see where it turned out for me. I lost everything. I lost, my career. I lost my money. I nearly lost my life. I lost my longtime partner. I lost my house. I lost any financial security. And so if somebody recognizes themselves in my story before all those losses and sees where it goes and thinks that maybe it will be different for them, maybe they'll think that they can step off earlier. And so that's its use to me in the world. And that was really what drove having it be published.
How are those relationships now? I mean, how many years has it been since you've actually been sober?
From the period of time described in this book, it's almost 7 years.
Okay.
So it's been a long, and some of those relationships are only now beginning to mend.
Right.
And my experience of it is that I rarely have a day that goes by that doesn't involve some sort of engagement with the damage of the past. And part of that is that I had 90 clients. Mm-hmm. I had a company. I had employees. And so all those 90 clients, those writers who I represented as a literary agent, had to find new representation. And so, little by slowly, many of them, most of them have come back and I represent now. But, that's as recently as a week and a half ago, somebody called me and said, hey, do you want to have lunch? I'd like to talk. And even the people who came back to me sooner, are the contours of our relationship involve that history. I mean, it's
right.
I have a great sense of gratitude that they've trusted me again, and I'm surprised.
It's humbling.
It's humbling and it's surprising. I mean,
right.
I literally on a daily basis am surprised that people still trust me.
Right.
And
oh yeah, because that's a violation of trust, big time.
Huge.
Yeah, especially with people who aren't used to addiction or having people close to them be violated in that way.
There's somebody who I know is sober who dealt with lots of addicts and alcoholics in his life. And when I came back and also was a very close friend and a client, and when I came back to New York, he said, to protect himself, he really needed to not have me in his life.
Which
And
is wise. Especially
he drew a line,
his
he
end.
protected
Yeah,
himself.
it's a boundary line.
It's a boundary. And then 6 months later, we had a tea, and then like 3 months after that, we had a lunch, and now he's like my brother now.
Right.
So, if you stay sober, and if you show up, and if you demonstrate over the period of time that you're responsible and sober, then people you have a chance of having some of those relationships. Some of those relationships may never be salvaged, and that's just okay.
Right.
So.
Well, yeah, because you have permanent scars.
Yeah, there's
You
nothing
really
you can, and you can't legislate how people feel. All those clients,
No.
they had to come to me. I could not go to them and say,
No.
like, hey, I'm really healthy now. It was more like I just had to sort of demonstrate through my actions that I was
So
healthy.
do you think that some of this book is an explanation, I don't know, almost like a thank you or a sorry apology a little bit to those people
Absolutely
at all?
not.
Okay.
No. No. It's not an act of contrition. There was a review in the New York Review of Books that said, as an act of contrition, this book fails. And it's not an act of contrition.
You do have some critics out there.
But it's not an act of contrition on any level.
Right.
What it is it's a frank account of active addiction and some of the shaping agents from like my childhood and after.
Right.
It just shaped its expression.
Right.
I'm an addict from birth. I believe you either are or you're not.
Yeah, the disease concept.
Yeah, and if you grow up in Jamaica, then you may smoke a lot of pot. If you grow up in Alaska, you may drink a lot of booze. But at the core, I think we're all like we either are or we're not.
Yes.
And where we grow up shapes the expression of that.
And we have a numbing society anyway, so it's just like, what's your drug of choice? Food.
Yeah.
People have lots of different things, and yours was very apparently devastating to you, and it doesn't matter what economic status you are. I mean, people go after that, and it's just like, no, I know you have some support systems and some fallback, but it doesn't mean that you're immune.
No. I mean, drugs, crack cuts through, everything.
Yeah.
Gender, age, economic status, level of success or not success.
Right.
It just doesn't matter.
Do you ever want to numb again or go back at any point? I mean, do you have any trigger moments?
Sure. There are certainly times after a while when I thought that there would never be 5 minutes that would go by where I didn't want to like drink or use drugs,
Right.
And now it's many months usually, and then every once in a while there'll be like some circumstance, like some angle of light, and I'll just be like, damn, a drink sounds like a good idea.
Right.
I never desire crack. I never desire drugs. But for me, if I have a drink, I instantly want to call a drug dealer.
Right.
I'm like, I'm just, programmed on a cellular level that, like, if vodka's in my system, then I'm, like, finding a dealer somewhere.
Right.
So...
There's no social drinking for you.
No.
No, I
No, it's like, it's a sip,
Some people think
it's a
they
sip
can.
and then a crack house,
Right.
and then a suicide attempt. It's
Exactly.
really not
And that's
a
the
lot of fun.
disease that people
Yeah.
don't quite understand, and it must be difficult. And I always think that with addiction, being in a society that alcohol is, I mean, they make times of days around it, like happy hour and things
Sure.
like that. It makes it more of a
Sure.
struggle.
Oh, yeah.
Especially in the bad days, I'm sure.
A lot of my friends still drink. Like,
Right.
I'm often in social situations where people are drinking. It never looks good to me.
Right.
Other people's drinking isn't the thing that looks good to
Right.
me. It's somehow, like, at some moment, usually when I'm outside of New York, away from people, not being observed, that I have, like, a sneaky little thought, like,
Right.
I could have a drink right now, and wouldn't that be great? Now I'm so embedded in my program of recovery that, like, I'm so connected to people who are actively seeking to be sober. So, whether it's a sponsee or whether it's like somebody else who's in my sober community, like texting me saying like, hey, like I know you're out of town, like what's going on? I don't stray very far from the fold.
Oh, you don't?
I
Okay,
never
good,
stray
yeah.
far from my recovery.
Okay. So
I'm-
your 12-step, is that the one?
I'm actively engaged in my recovery every single day.
Okay, good.
So, I don't talk about the program of recovery that I'm in because because I may relapse. And,
Right.
Or I may say something that upsets somebody, and I don't want
That's
them
not-
to hold that against the program that saved my life and can
Good.
save a lot of other people.
Good. Yeah, because I think that there's no one-size-fit-all with this. I mean, some people do 12 steps. Some people do other types of counseling, or some people could just stop on their own. I don't always recommend that because some things can kill you if you pull yourself off. So
Yeah. The one thing that I see and have experienced myself as the greatest kind of path towards sobriety, like getting sober and staying sober, is being involved with other alcoholics and addicts and feeling useful. And even if you have
Give
2
back.
days and somebody has like 1 day behind you and you say, I'll take you to a meeting, somehow being important. It's almost like, addicts and alcoholics, when they come into recovery, usually have a lot of circumstances. There's legal stuff, wives have left,
The consequences are
kids
great.
won't speak to them. There's a lot of shit going down.
Yeah, there is.
A lot of shame. They
Yeah.
feel worthless, and so. But and a lot of times, like, you have done a lot of terrible things. I did a lot of terrible things.
Right.
But then you're suddenly in the circumstance where everybody's kind of struggling, and then you kind of can act like a useful person and a good person in this context,
Right.
and then you act as if one, and then you become one.
True.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And so, and alcoholics and addicts like myself are excessively concerned with themselves. And
Yes.
so the
Yes.
minute once
That is a common.
once they forget about themselves just a little bit by helping somebody else and attending to their problems, they're not only emancipated from the shame, but they're emancipated from the desire to drink and use drugs. That was the key for my getting sober. I had a very hard time getting sober. I relapsed a lot. And it was only once I was really involved in a community of people getting sober, that where people were calling me and asking for help, and I took somebody to rehab and I helped them move out, that I somehow felt, partly responsible with them.
Right.
And my problems seemed smaller in comparison.
You're out of your head, which gets you in trouble.
Exactly.
I know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Somebody said to me once, "What is it like? Like my head is not a neighborhood I should visit alone."
True.
And it's true.
True.
So,
Well, I really appreciate you coming to talk to me. Do you have more of this word vomit of your history that you want to get out, or you feel pretty good about this?
I wrote another book. Actually, it's coming out in April. It's called 90 Days, and
Okay.
and it's a transcription of the period of time that I tried to get my first 90 consecutive days of sobriety in recovery. It's often suggested that people go to 90 meetings in 90 days, and getting 90 days is a real focal point. It was a real focal point for me where I had so much debt, I had so much shit around me, legal troubles, and I had my first sponsor, who was a saint, and it just said to me, like, let's just get 90 days and then we'll deal with that. So I could focus on getting 90 days, like somehow that was achievable,
Right.
whereas this
The rest of your life.
yeah, and I was unemployable.
Yeah.
All these things were so unmanageable and so difficult, but getting one more day toward 90 was.
Right.
And it also identifies you in the room, whatever room of recovery you go to. You raise your hand, you say, I have 4 days sober, people pay attention to you.
Right.
And they come up and they say, hey, like, you want my number, I can take you to a meeting, or, if you want to pick up, call me first. So it really, it's a brilliant way to kind of like get people connected.
The network is everywhere.
Bingo.
Yes. So take advantage.
Yeah, so that's what that book is. It's called 90 Days. It's going to come out in April. So if the first book is sort of about active addiction, this is about like actively trying to get sober.
Before I let you go, I do have one more question. So when you said that you were worried about losing all of those memories, that's why you had to write it then. Do you feel like you've forgotten some of it?
What I learned about memory in this, many people say, like, I could never remember. You remember in such detail. And the truth is, if you ask me a question about, like, one specific thing right now, I might not have the detail, even if it's in the book.
Right.
But, like, if I sit for a moment and I remember one detail and then another, it's funny how it all floods back. You have to, if you just stop and reoccupy, like some instance in your life, whether it's you're 10 years old or 25 years old, it's amazing what comes out. It's like, oh, like the blanket was blue. Oh, and then the chair was
Right.
brown. And like, I remember we were watching Love Boat. And it's
Right.
one thing comes and then you're really in it again. And that was my experience writing the books.
Which is dangerous for some addicts, because when you do get that connected flood of memory, that you can get the shame back real quick.
Yeah.
Especially if you haven't dealt with some of those or you didn't remember.
Yeah. It's true. It's useful for me. I mean, I no longer have the shame attached to those memories, but it's incredibly useful is that, like, anytime I think about, like, one of those times where I think, shit, a drink would be kind of a good idea, I just think it through, and it's like, I remember, like, what one drink, I've had that thought before. I've picked up. I've then done drugs. I've then,
Right.
5 days later, turned up in a motel on the outskirts of New Jersey. You know what I mean?
You know where it leads you
Yeah,
to.
exactly. And it
Yeah.
was so bad at the very end that feeling, like, just it demolishes any sense of desire
Right.
for alcohol and drugs. So, and that's just one of the the many ways in which people stay sober. So memory can be your greatest tool.
True. And I think about your book because as a substance abuse counselor, people are always like, oh, they haven't hit their bottom. Well, our intention is to not let anybody everybody hit their bottoms, to
Yeah.
raise the bottom. So I'm hoping if somebody reads your book, it will raise their bottom to get them help.
Yeah, exactly. Because much of the book describes the years where I tried to manage it. It's like, I'm just going to have 4 drinks tonight, just 6 drinks tonight, just 14 drinks tonight, literally. And that sounds exaggerated. It's absolutely
And if
true.
I only just drink vodka this time,
Yeah,
it won't
exactly.
be as bad if it's crack.
And I've tried every single thing, like just drinking Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, like no Mondays and Tuesday. Oh, just this Wednesday, just this once.
Yeah.
And you see how over the years you negotiate with yourself into
Your life away.
Yeah, I literally did. I
Yeah.
absolutely did, and I failed every single time. Time. And so, if anybody sees themselves in that and sees the double life that sometimes develops like mine did, here I was an agent and I was like going to fancy dinner parties and book readings and nice offices, and then disappearing after dinner into crack dens on the Lower East Side. And the shame that goes with
Right.
that and having that kind of double life. So if anybody sees that that's what their life looks like right now, I'm here to tell you, like, it won't get
You're
better.
not managing it.
It won't get better.
Right.
It will only get worse.
It makes me so frustrated when people call functioning addicts or functioning alcoholics. It's like, just because you go to work and do your job doesn't mean you're not an addict.
Yeah. And I was a functioning addict for many years.
It's like,
I was a functioning crack addict for 10 years.
but you were still having the consequences.
And then my life blew up like the space shuttle.
Right.
Like, so it's like
You did hit your bottom.
So you may like have, and that bottom, and the bottom described in here wasn't even my real
Right,
bottom.
exactly.
I mean, I still
Right,
relapse.
right.
Like,
Well,
just
bottom
when you
is
think
dead.
just when you think you've gone to the basement, you suddenly addicts get out a shovel and start digging deeper.
Right. And
know?
that's why therapists don't want you to get there. We're trying to keep you from doing that.
Yeah.
So people having to get to that point is really dangerous because you could have died easily.
They may die. They may kill people
Right.
with their drunk driving. There's so many ways in which, and the problem with so many of us, and me at the top of that list, is like we learn at the speed of pain, and so oftentimes if the addict or the alcoholic doesn't feel the pain enough, they don't change the behavior.
Right.
And there's nothing that another human being can do. You have to want it.
You do.
You have to have the willingness.
You have to take the hand.
Yeah.
Because it could be there all out there and it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Because if you don't want it, you're just going to die.
But I do meet people who are in recovery, and they astonish me, who it's like they had one bad night in college, and then they were like, I really can't do this anymore. And then
Right.
they go to whatever program they go to, and then they stay sober. And I'm
Right.
just like, God, I wish that was me. I'd be the president of the United States if I got like sober in college. Do you know what I mean?
But maybe you'll just be doing other things.
Damn. Yeah,
But sometimes the extremes are really good motivators. Because I know a lot of people who go into counseling or a group and they see, well, I'm not that bad or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's just like the comparison is also sometimes troubling because it's whatever your experience is, and it doesn't mean that you're not an addict or have the disease.
Yeah.
Why do you got to let it get that far?
Yeah,
If
yeah.
you don't have to, don't.
And people who are active addicts and alcoholics who don't want to accept the truth of that often put themselves in the company of people who are worse than they are. So they say, "See, I'm not that bad."
Oh, yeah.
So
well, that's just to justify.
Yeah,
I
and
know.
but we're very they describe the disease as cunning and baffling. Well, so are addicts and alcoholics. They're
True.
incredibly cunning and baffling, and they are the most cunning and baffling with themselves.
Oh yeah, I mean, people. I find it remarkable when people tell me, "Oh, well, this person that I know is an addict. They're just so smart." I'm like, most addicts are
Yeah.
like brilliant people. Like you have no idea.
By circumstance, because they're so sneaky.
Right? If you put as much energy and money as you get into getting drugs and alcohol, you would be a millionaire.
Totally,
I mean, really.
absolutely. No, I mean,
you
the
sell your
empire of
mother
effort
for some of that.
goes into
Yeah,
it is just.
it really baffling.
Staggering.
It is. I want to tell you how much I appreciate you coming and talking, and I really hope that this resonates for people not to go this far.
Yeah.
And to really just get the help and take the risk of feeling the pain and repercussions that they've put themselves and others through. Because there is a light on the other side.
There is a light, and on the other side, it's so. I mean, there's people in recovery often say it's like beyond their wildest dreams, and
Right.
it genuinely is. I mean, this life is so much better than the other.
It's not just survival. See, that's the thing. It's like, well, who wants to just live to survive? You can triumph. That is the magic of it.
Yeah.
And just because people try to avoid the bad feelings, there's a really wonderful spectrum of good feelings too.
Yeah.
But you're going to feel them all right when you come out, and it's kind of extreme. So just that is a
Yeah.
take home.
Just
So
take it one day at a
yeah,
time.
exactly. So So thank you. This has been Bill Clegg with his book, Portrait of an Addict as a Young Man. And check out for his next book. And it's been a memoir. So I am Julie Teeling at Life Improvement Radio.
Thank you for listening to Life Improvement Radio. The views expressed by show hosts or their guests are their own and shall not be construed in any way as advice from Life Improvement Radio. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our website. Personal perspectives expressed by the producers, writers, or editors will always be presented as such. Any rebroadcast or retransmission without the expressed written consent of Life Improvement Radio is strictly prohibited. Thanks for listening.